Hi everybody, this is Joe. Welcome back. Last weekend, I took the opportunity to go out and shoot some large format black and white film. I was really itching to do this for a while, and I used my Intrepid 4x5 kit. It's a nice little compact camera. So for large format black and white work, it's more of an ideal setup if you're using a spot meter. I have an old Pentax spot meter, but I'm not really sure of the accuracy of it. But in the meantime, I was using this new Sekonic L308 SU that I bought last year, and it seems to be adequately accurate for general metering. Of course, you can't meter your shadows or highlights separately with this unless you actually walk over to a highlight area or shadow area and meter it locally. But so for general metering, it seems to be pretty accurate, and my results look like it does work pretty well. So for my choice of film, I had several boxes of black and white sheet film in my darkroom. I wanted to try out the Arista EDU Ultra 200. This is a 200 speed black and white film, fairly inexpensive. I think I've used it before, and it's kind of an interesting film speed-wise, right? Faster than 100 speed and slower than 400, obviously. Well, last week, the day I went out for this little photo expedition, it was out along the banks of the Rio Grande on the north edge of Albuquerque, and we've had a really good spring runoff. This is probably the best runoff we've had in decades because of all the snowpack up in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. Well, it's about a week later, and I just now got around to developing these 4 negatives that I exposed. I was using the Stearman Press 4x5 tank, and right now I'm just rinsing the tank in some warm water because the last step of the process is using Kodak Photo Flow as surfactant. It helps the water sheet off the film without leaving water spots. So I don't like to leave the photo flow residue in the developing tank because it'll kind of gum it up. So anyways, we're at the tail end of the process. And there they are. I think they all came out pretty good as far as I can tell right now. Well, a part of large format photography that I found vital is to record data. Record your exposures, your meter readings, how you metered it, your development process. This is how you learn from your mistakes and become more consistent. And I've been using this Right in the Rain brand zippered weatherproof pouch that my friend Richard gave me a few years ago. But I'm actually, instead of using a Right in the Rain notebook, I'm using a Rhodia pad. And I just like the grid pad for this purpose. I'm using just an inexpensive retractable ballpoint, but I do keep track of all my exposures in camera, the date, the kind of film I'm using, how I metered it, what the subject matter was, and what film holder I'm using, and then my development. I was looking here originally at some HC110 dilution B. I instead went to use RO9, which is the modern version of Rotenol, and I used a 1+25 dilution for 5 minutes. And so this is just the calculation of how I figured out the volumes of 1+25. Also, my fixer, I had to mix up a fresh batch of film fixer, which is diluted at 1+4. So it ended up being that volume of fixers concentrate to water. And then photo flow, as I mentioned earlier, it's the best way to mix photo flow is the Kodak's recommended dilution of 1 to 200. If you don't have enough photo flow, it won't give you the surfactant properties that you're looking for. If you use too much photo flow, it gets sudsy and kind of leaves a soapy film on the film itself and on your development tank. So I had to calculate the dilution for that just to make sure I'm accurate. So take notes. That's the lesson. So I processed the 4 negatives all at once in my Stearman Press 4x5 developing tank. So I'm out here in the darkroom and I've decided to heck with it. I'm going to make an enlargement. I'm going to try to make an 8x10 and I'm going to print it onto some RC paper, I believe. That way it'll dry a little bit quicker, and I think I have some warm tone RC paper. So what I'm doing right now is getting set up. You guys have seen this before, but let me show it to you again. So instead of open trays, I'm using these storage compartments, these 3-level storage compartments, and I'm using 2 of them. The way I've done this in the past is I would do developer, rinse, stop, rinse, fixer, and then the final rinse. And I've noticed recently, if I put all the rinses on the right side and all the chemistry on the left, it's actually easier because now you can go back and forth like that. But the reason why I put a rinse step between the developer, stop, bath, and fix is to help keep the chemistry from being diluted with too much carryover from the previous chemistry. And it just prolongs the life of the stop, bath, and the fixer by having water rinses prior to them. I'm just going to pour this from the bottom up, the fixer and the stop bath and then the developer. So this is part of the same batch of fixer I used for the film, diluted into some paper fixer that I also had mixed up there about a month or so ago. I've already tested it for activity and it is still active and not exhausted. Okay, so I have my film holder and the negative that we want to use. And then I'm going to put an old print, just the back side facing up on the easel, making sure I get my blade set right for the border, and this will give me a surface to focus upon. Okay, so I've composed and focused the image on the easel here, on this test piece of paper. I'm over scanning slightly so I don't get the edges of the image in the picture, and I think I like the composition. We'll see how it goes. I'm using a grain focuser to focus the enlarger. I have the enlarging lens wide open right now, and so I'm going to stop it down to probably f16 or f22 or something like that so I can get the adequate corner sharpness also. Well, alright, so there's my test strip in the fixer, and I definitely have some dark shadows. Well, now that I've replenished my developer with a little bit of extra fresh in there, fresh concentrate. So we'll finish fixing this and take a look at it. This goes from 5 seconds to 30 seconds in 5-second intervals. So now, of course, this one, the shadows are too light. They're too grayish. So the 10-second one, I can see these shrubs here. In the 15-second one, they start to get really dark. So I'm almost thinking that maybe around 12 seconds might be good, sort of halfway between this one and that one. Well, I gotta say, this is a really pretty looking print. I was concerned initially under the red lights that the shadows looked too dark, and of course they do look dark under red lights, but this is like a luster finish paper. It's not a glossy paper, and once you dry it, I'm just sort of superficially squeegeeing the surface, but once you dry it, the shadows do come up more. These dull shine papers like matte finish and semi-matte and luster, they don't have as dark of a black as a glossy paper. So the fact that this is a quite high contrast scene actually works better with this particular kind of paper. I really love the contrast and the edge detail that I'm getting in the middle here with these branches that are sticking out of the water, and I like the reflection of the tree interspersed with these ripples in the water. It's just a beautiful picture. I'm really surprised how well it came out. Okay, here's a second print I made, and I did slightly less exposure, so I'm just getting slightly more detail up here in the shadow and the lighter part of this shaded tree, a little bit more here. I kind of like this a little better. It shows me what this negative is capable of. Well, since we live in a desert out here and fresh drinking water is at a premium, I typically rinse my prints on the landscaping. So it's interesting, this process of composing, exposing a scene on large format out in the field, you don't really know what the final print is going to be. But man, when you get a good enlargement like this and it's really crisp and the tones are really brilliant, it's really satisfying. And it really was actually pretty clean. I was surprised. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but my film drying cabinet seems to work pretty good for keeping things clean now. So this is a working print. This isn't really the final print. I would say probably I would try to print it at a lower contrast, maybe 1.5, grade 1.5. So the difference is if you wanted to raise the shadows simply by reducing the exposure temp, as I did on this second print, it also raises the density of the midtones and the highlights. Everything in the print becomes lighter. But if you decrease the contrast filtering and give it the right exposure time so the shadows are equivalent to where you want them to be, the highlights won't be as bright. And the midtones will be reduced, so it'll be a little bit more controlled contrast. So that might be something to do in the future. Overall, it's not a bad picture. I'm pretty satisfied with it. It's just wonderful to see when you enlarge a 4x5 negative to only 8x10, you're only doing a 2x enlargement, which is kind of like taking a 35mm negative and enlarging it to the size of a medium format negative as a print. Everything is still really crisp, and it really is amazing how sharp it is. There's detail here in the distant shrubs and tree line that I really can't hardly resolve with my eye. It's so sharp, and that's really neat to see. And I don't really see any granularity with this 200 speed Arista Ultra film, so I kind of like it, and I like the results I got with the R09 Rodinal developer. You know, examining this print has me thinking that it's a good time to discuss one's intention when crafting a photograph like this, from seeing the original scene to how you think the print should look at the end, and which Ansel Adams called pre-visualization. And the issue here is that if you look at this print, it is actually a high contrast print. The highlights are rather blown. The shadows in the darkest part of the trees are super dense. And you might say, well, that is really not a great tonal range. I could have done some kind of technique with a digital camera like HDR and retained both the peak whites and the darkest shadows. But part of the thing is, this is not how I visualized it. When I was actually there down by the river, it looked like that print looks. It looked high contrast. I could see the dramatic shine of the sky off the water. I could see that high contrast with those branches and detritus floating on the water in the midground. And I could see those dark trunks of those cottonwood trees in the shade. And this print renders it the way I kind of saw it. And in the harsh light of New Mexico, even the peak whites, like there's a rock down in the lower left quadrant that is pretty much totally blown out the way it was printed. But when you're kind of looking at the scene, as I was, if you're looking at the shadow detail in the trees, those highlights are really brilliant to your eyes. So it kind of gives me the sense of what the scene actually looked like when I was there. So sometimes the best answer for how you should render a print in terms of contrast and tonal range isn't always the cookie cutter approach of let's do high definition on a maximum tonal range, so there's always peak whites with detail and shadows with detail. Sometimes you have to render it the way you think it feels when you're actually there. Another thing I like about the negative itself is I did get adequate depth of focus from the near ground in the lower left quadrant to the distant tree line in the upper mid right. So that was exposed at a 30th of a second at f/22. So gave me pretty good depth of focus while still retaining a really sharp detail without excessive diffraction. The basic technique with large format cameras is you generally focus and compose with a lens wide open, in this case f/5.6. Decide on what your primary plane of focus is going to be, near or far, somewhere midway in there in that range, and then you stop down and evaluate whether you have adequate depth of focus for what you want to be in focus in the image. Well, this is just a little large format outing along the Rio Grande during the spring runoff when the river is nice and high. It was a lot of fun. I'm going to have to go out and do some more of this, do more large format film photography. If you guys have any questions or concerns, drop them in the comments below. And until next time, have yourselves a great day and stay creative.